Imagine waking up one morning to discover your home has been sold. Without your permission. The deed is still in your name, but strangers are moving in. And your own daughter is part of the plot. That's exactly what happened to me. And this is my story. I still remember the sound of that letter hitting the floor. A soft thud that would change my whole life. Funny how something so small can start a storm. I was standing in my kitchen, fixing myself a cup of coffee, the morning light spilling through the curtains. It was one of those quiet, easy mornings you don't think twice about. Birds outside. The old clock ticking on the wall. My slippers sliding across the hardwood floors I'd refinished with my husband. God rest his soul. I picked up the mail, flipping through bills and coupons. Then I saw it. A thick white envelope, official looking, with my name printed bold and clean. I tore it open casually at first. But when I read those first few lines, my heart nearly stopped. Congratulations on the successful sale of your property at 214 Maple Drive. I blinked, reading it again, sure my eyes were playing tricks on me. 214 Maple Drive. My house. My home. The one I'd lived in for 32 years. The one where my children grew up, where my husband died holding my hand. I dropped into a chair, letters shaking in my hands. For a few seconds I couldn't even breathe. I checked the date last week. I checked the signature, not mine. Now I've made my share of mistakes in life, but signing away my house? That wasn't one of them. I got up, pacing the kitchen, my heart pounding. Maybe it was a scam, I thought. People pull all kinds of tricks these days. But the letter had all the right details. The address, the sale price, the new owner's name. It was real. I called the number listed on the letter, some real estate office downtown. The receptionist put me on hold, then transferred me to a man named Kyle. His voice was chipper, like someone who smiles too much because they're hiding something. Yes, Mrs. Williams, he said. The sale went through last Friday. The buyers are thrilled. We'll be sending you the closing documents and... I cut him off. The sale went through? What sale? I didn't sell my house. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause that tells you someone just realized they've stepped into something bad. After a few seconds he said, that's strange. The signature on the authorization looks valid. It's notarized even. That's when my stomach dropped. Someone had signed my name. I hung up without another word. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down again. I just stared at that letter for what felt like hours, the words swimming in front of me. Sold. Closing. Transfer. And then, almost by instinct, I called my daughter. Denise. My firstborn. The one who always said she'd take care of me when I got older. She picked up on the second ring. Hey Mom. You okay? Her voice was calm, too calm. That was my first clue. Denise, I said slowly, did you sell my house? Silence. Then she sighed, that kind of deep sigh people make when they're about to lie. Mom, listen, please don't get upset. We just did what was best for you. What was best for me? I felt my voice rising. You sold my home without even asking? Mom, the house is old. It's too much work for you alone. The roof leaks, the yard's a mess, and that's my mess. I snapped. My roof, my home. You had no right. She started crying then, but I could tell it wasn't guilt, it was frustration. We thought we were helping, she said. You always said you didn't want to live there forever. We already moved your things into storage. You'll thank us later. Storage. My chest tightened. They'd already moved my things? My voice went cold. Denise. Who signed those papers? She didn't answer. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. For a long time after that, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the oak tree my husband planted the year we moved in. It was taller now, its roots deep, unshakable. Just like the life we built here. Every nail, every photo, every scratch on the floor told our story. And now my own child had sold it like it was nothing. By the time the sun started setting, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to just sit here and let them take everything. I might be old, but I wasn't helpless. The next morning, I drove downtown to the county records office. The clerk was a young woman, polite but distracted, typing fast behind her desk. I need to check the records on a property, I said, sliding the address across the counter. I think there's been a mistake. She tapped on her keyboard, squinting at the screen. After a moment, her brow furrowed. That's odd, she said. According to this, the sale's listed as complete, but the deed is still under your name. My pulse quickened. Still under my name? Yes. It looks like the transfer wasn't finalized. The title hasn't legally changed hands. I stared at her, the weight of that sentence sinking in. That meant they didn't own it yet. Not legally. There was still time. I thanked her and walked back to my car, feeling something I hadn't felt since my husband passed: purpose. They thought I was too weak to notice, too soft to fight. They forgot who taught them to stand up for themselves. That house was more than wood and paint. It was my history, my proof that I'd built something that mattered. And if they wanted to take that from me, they were going to have to fight for it. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat there a long time. The porch light flickered, the paint on the shutters chipped, the yard overgrown, and still it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I whispered to the house, almost like it could hear me. "Don't worry, baby. Nobody's taking you without a fight." And in that quiet moment I made myself a promise. They might have signed my name on those papers, but they had no idea whose name still owned that deed. And that's when I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. I hadn't slept much, just stared at the ceiling half the night thinking about how my own daughter could do something like this. Every time I closed my eyes I saw my husband's face, the way he used to sit on the porch after work, rocking in that old chair with a glass of sweet tea, watching the world go by. I kept wondering what he'd say if he were here now. Probably something calm and measured like, "Don't let anger make you blind, Evelyn. Think smart." That's what he always said when life threw something ugly our way. So that's what I decided to do: think smart. I made myself some coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out all the papers I'd collected from the county office the day before. It was all legal language: escrow, lien release, transfer authorization. None of it made much sense to me. But one line jumped out: sale authorized by power of attorney. My blood ran cold. I never signed a power of attorney. I would never give anyone control over my property. That's when I realized this wasn't just a betrayal. It was fraud. I picked up the phone and called Denise again. She didn't answer. I tried 3 more times before finally getting her voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I wanted to look her in the eyes when I asked her how she could do this to her own mother. Instead, I decided to visit her. She lived across town in one of those big, modern houses with 2-car garages and manicured lawns. The kind of neighborhood that looks nice from the outside but feels cold when you step in. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she froze. Her hair was still wet from a shower, her robe tied tight, eyes darting like a guilty child. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I pushed past her, not angry, just determined. "We need to talk." She closed the door slowly, her husband, Greg, appearing behind her like a shadow. He was always polite in that fake salesman kind of way. The kind of man who thought charm could cover up greed. "Evelyn," he said smoothly, "you should have called first." "I tried," I said, meeting his eyes. "You didn't answer." I laid the letter on the kitchen counter. "You two want to explain this?" Denise wouldn't look at me. Greg poured himself a cup of coffee like nothing was wrong. "We told you, Mom," Denise muttered. "You can't take care of that house alone anymore. It's falling apart. You're not young like you used to be." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You think that gives you the right to steal from me?" "Don't say it like that," Greg said, his voice tightening. "We didn't steal. We transferred. We thought we were helping you. The neighborhood's dying and the offer was good. You could move somewhere safer, closer to us." "Closer to you," I repeated, my voice steady now. "So you can control everything I do? My money, my house, my life." Denise finally snapped. "You don't understand. You never listen. You always act like you're fine, but you're not. You're old, Mom. You forget things. You could have lost that house to taxes or worse." I just stared at her. "You think forgetting to water the plants means I've lost my mind? You forged my name, Denise. You broke the law." Her lip trembled. Greg stepped forward, trying to act calm. "Let's not make this dramatic. The papers were notarized. Everything's official." That word, notarized, made my heart stop. Because I remembered that the notary who used to work at the local bank, Mrs. Jensen, had retired years ago. Whoever stamped those documents, it wasn't her. I hope you two understand what you've done, I said quietly. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a crime. And I'm not just going to sit here and let you get away with it. Denise started crying, covering her face. Mom, please don't. You'll ruin everything. We used the money to pay off some debts. We were going to tell you once things settled down. I turned for the door. Then you better start settling up fast, because the next person you'll be talking to is a lawyer. I left their house and drove straight to the police station. But when I explained the situation, the officer on duty gave me that sympathetic look people give old women, half pity, half disbelief. Ma'am, he said, these things get complicated when it's family. You'll need to talk to a real estate attorney. So that's what I did. I drove to an old brick building on Main Street, the law offices of Charles Davenport, an old friend of my late husband. I hadn't seen him in years. When I walked in, he almost didn't recognize me. Evelyn Williams, he said, smiling faintly. It's been a long time. I nodded. Too long, Charles. And I wish I were here under better circumstances. I laid the papers out on his desk and told him everything. The letter, the forged signature, the power of attorney I never signed. He listened quietly, occasionally tapping a pen against his notepad. When I finished, he leaned back and said, Well, Evelyn, they've put themselves in quite a corner. How bad is it? I asked. Bad for them, he said. You still own that property. The deed's in your name. Without a valid power of attorney, the sale's illegal. But you'll need to act fast. Once the buyer tries to finalize the transfer, things get messy. He made a few calls, his voice calm but sharp. We can issue a cease and desist to the buyer, he said, hanging up the phone. That'll freeze the sale for now. I sat there quietly, thinking about everything I just heard. My daughter had stolen my trust, my security, and nearly my home, but the law was on my side. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Before I left, Charles put a hand on my shoulder. Evelyn, he said softly, I know it hurts, but don't let anger blind you. Fight smart, just like Robert would have wanted. I smiled faintly. You sound just like him. That night I drove back home, parking under that old oak tree. The air smelled of rain, the porch light buzzing faintly. I sat there for a long time thinking about how everything had changed, and yet somehow everything was still mine. They might have sold my house without asking, but the one thing they didn't count on was me. And I was just getting started. The next morning the rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and glistening. The driveway was covered in damp leaves, and the air smelled like wet earth and memory. I stood there on the porch for a long time just staring at the front door. It looked the same, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Every inch of that house had been violated, not by strangers but by my own blood. Inside I found boxes that weren't mine. A few drawers were empty, photo frames missing. I walked from room to room, my slippers brushing against dust lines where furniture used to be. They'd started packing without even telling me. It hit me hard, not just the betrayal, but the thought that my daughter must have stood right here, in this same hallway, boxing up my life like it was clutter. In the living room, I found one thing they hadn't taken, the deed. The original deed, framed in a cheap plastic folder, still tucked away in my husband's old roll-top desk. I kept it there for years, thinking it was just a formality. Now it felt like a lifeline. I picked it up, tracing my finger over my own name, Evelyn M. Williams. That signature, that ink, it was mine and mine alone. Charles, my lawyer, had said the deed was my shield. He was right. But a shield isn't enough if you don't know where the arrows are coming from. And I still didn't know who the buyer was. That afternoon, I went back to the county records office. The clerk recognized me this time and pulled up the buyer's information. It was purchased by a developer, she said. A company called Fallon Properties. The head of the company is Mark Fallon. I'd heard that name before. He was one of those developers who'd been buying up houses in our area, knocking them down and building cheap apartment complexes. He didn't care about history or families. Just profit. I asked for the buyer's contact information. The clerk hesitated. Technically, I can't give that out, she said. Then she leaned forward, voice low. But the company's listed on Main Street, next to the old post office. That was enough. I drove straight there. My hands were tight on the wheel the whole way, my jaw clenched. I wasn't even sure what I'd say when I saw him. All I knew was that someone was about to get an education in what happens when you mess with a woman who's got nothing left to lose. The office was slick. Glass doors, gold lettering, fake plants, the smell of expensive cologne. I walked up to the receptionist and said, "I need to speak with Mr. Fallon. It's about a property he just purchased." She looked me up and down, hesitated, then picked up the phone. A minute later, a tall man in a dark gray suit came out, smiling like a politician. "Mrs. Williams, I presume?" So he already knew who I was. That told me plenty. He motioned for me to sit. "I understand there's been some confusion about the sale of your home," he said smoothly. "I assure you we did everything by the book." "Really?" I said, leaning forward. "Because last I checked, the deed is still in my name." That smile of his didn't budge, but his eyes flickered, just a little. "There must be some delay in the paperwork. These things happen." I took the deed out of my bag and laid it on his desk. "Does that look like a delay to you, Mr. Fallon?" He stared at it for a moment, then gave a little laugh. "Mrs. Williams, I sympathize. But your daughter had full authorization to sell the property. We have notarized documents." I felt my anger rising, but I kept my voice steady. "You have forged documents. Whoever stamped them committed fraud. And if you go through with this sale, you'll be an accessory." That got his attention. He leaned back in his chair, the smile fading. "You're saying the signature's fake?" "I'm saying my daughter lied. And you bought into it without checking." For a moment, the only sound in that room was the hum of the air conditioner. Then he sighed. "I'll look into it," he said. "But if what you're saying is true, this will cause a lot of trouble for everyone involved." "Not for everyone," I said, standing. "Just for the people who tried to steal my home." When I got back to my car, my hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. That night I called Charles and told him everything. He said, "Good. Now we wait. Fallon's lawyers will call. They won't want the bad press." But I didn't want to wait. I wanted to see what my daughter would do when the truth started closing in. 2 days later, she showed up on my doorstep. No warning, no call. Just standing there in her fancy coat, eyes red from crying. "Mom, please," she said the moment I opened the door. "You went to Fallon? Do you have any idea what you've done? They're threatening to sue us." I crossed my arms. "You mean they're suing you for selling something you didn't own?" "That sounds about right." Tears streamed down her face. "I made a mistake, okay? We needed the money. Greg lost his job. We were drowning in debt." I wanted to feel sympathy, I really did. But every time I looked at her, I saw the moving boxes, the empty walls, the missing pictures of her father. "You could have come to me," I said quietly. "You didn't have to betray me." "I thought I was helping," she whispered. "I thought if I just handled it, you'd be mad at first, but you'd see it was for the best." "For the best?" I repeated softly. "You sold your father's house, the house he built with his own hands. You sold his memory." Denise broke down then, sobbing into her hands. For a moment I wanted to reach out, but I couldn't. Some lines once crossed never fade. Finally I said, "You need to fix this, Denise. Tell Fallon the truth. Withdraw the sale. And if you don't, I'll let the law handle it." She nodded weakly, wiping her face. "I'll try." When she left, the house felt colder than ever. But at least I'd drawn my line in the sand. I stood by the window watching her car disappear down the road and whispered to myself, "You thought you could sell my home, Denise. But you forgot who raised you." Because this fight wasn't over, not yet. And I wasn't backing down. 3 days passed before I heard anything. I spent those days pacing between the front porch and the living room, replaying every conversation in my head. The call with Denise, my visit to Fallon's office, the words Charles had said about staying patient. But patience was a hard thing to find when your home felt like it was sitting on a ticking clock. On the 4th morning my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that came through was smooth and practiced, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who charged by the minute. "Mrs. Williams? This is Jonathan Pierce, legal counsel for Fallon Properties." I could already hear the arrogance under his courtesy. "I understand you've raised some concerns about the sale of your property," he continued. "Mr. Fallon asked me to reach out so we can resolve this amicably." I said, There's nothing to resolve. The sale was fraudulent. I didn't sign anything. He let out a polite laugh. Mrs. Williams, our documentation is airtight. We have a notarized power of attorney signed in your name. And I told Mr. Fallon that signature isn't mine. Well, he said, for your sake I hope you can prove that. That tone, it was like a knife disguised as a smile. Because if you can't, he added, the sale will proceed as planned. And once it closes, reversing it will be nearly impossible. I didn't say another word. I just hung up. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Angry at the arrogance of men like Fallon, and angry at myself for ever raising a daughter who thought she could walk all over me. I called Charles right away and told him everything. They're bluffing, he said. Fallon's trying to pressure you. Don't let him. What if they push it through anyway? I asked. Then we file an injunction. But first I want to see that power of attorney. So he arranged a meeting with Fallon's lawyers. When we walked into that conference room 2 days later, I swear it felt like walking into a lion's den. Fallon was there, sitting at the head of the table, his lawyer beside him. He gave me that same smug smile as if I were just a silly old woman causing trouble. Charles kept his composure. Gentlemen, he said calmly, we're here to review the authorization you claim Mrs. Williams signed. Pierce slid a folder across the table. Inside were several copies of documents all neatly stamped and signed, or so they wanted me to believe. I picked up the page that said power of attorney and stared at the signature line. It looked like my handwriting, but it wasn't. I knew it the way a mother knows her own child's voice. The loops were too perfect, the letters too tight. I'd signed my name 1,000 times, on birthday cards, bills, and old checks. And this wasn't it. That's not my signature, I said firmly. Fallon smirked. It's a perfect match according to our notary. Charles leaned forward. Who notarized it? Pierce replied. Elisa Miller. Local notary, certified by the state. Charles flipped through his notes, then looked up with the faintest smile. Funny thing. Lisa Miller's commission expired last year. For a moment the whole room went quiet. Fallon's expression changed just slightly, but I saw it. Charles stood up. This sale is invalid. You've been defrauded by the sellers, and my client is the victim. If you proceed, we'll take this to court, and the press will eat you alive. Pierce tried to recover. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Fallon was already glaring at him. We'll review the documents again, he said finally. You'll hear from us. When we left the building, I felt lighter for the first time in weeks. Charles looked at me and said, You just watched a giant realize he's standing in quicksand. That night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the living room, the lights low, the house quiet. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was beginning to turn. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because 2 days later, Denise showed up again, this time with Greg. They didn't look calm or guilty anymore. They looked desperate. Greg didn't even wait for me to open the screen door before he started shouting. You're ruining us, Evelyn. Do you understand that? Fallon's threatening to sue. We could lose everything. I stared at him through the mesh, my voice calm. You already lost everything when you sold your integrity. Denise was crying again. Mom, please. We'll fix it, I promise. Just tell them you signed it. Say it was a misunderstanding. I felt something in me snap. A strength I didn't even know I still had. I opened the door and stepped outside, meeting her eyes. You want me to lie? After everything you did? Tears rolled down her face. I don't know what else to do. Greg scowled. She doesn't care, Denise. She'd rather drag her own family through court than help us. I turned to him, my voice steady. You stole from me. You forged my name. And now you want me to take the blame? You think that's family? He didn't answer. He just looked away, jaw tight. Leave, I said softly. Before I call the police. Denise hesitated, her face crumpling. Mom. I said leave. They walked back to their car without another word. As they drove off, I stood on the porch watching the taillights fade down the street. My heart hurt, but underneath the pain was something stronger. Resolve. That night, I sat down and wrote a statement for Charles detailing everything, the phone calls, the meetings, the threats. He said we'd file an official claim the next morning. I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the old house creak, rain tapping on the windows. I thought about my husband again, about how hard we'd worked for this place, about the nights we'd stayed up painting walls, fixing leaks, laughing through exhaustion. He'd always said this house was our anchor, the thing that kept us grounded no matter what storms came. Now I finally understood what he meant. They could take everything else, my trust, my peace, even my children's love, but as long as my name was on that deed, I wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. And when the morning light came streaming through those curtains, I was ready. This was no longer just about a house. It was about respect. And I was going to make sure they remembered exactly who I was. The morning we filed the case was colder than it should have been for April. The air had that sharp edge that makes your breath visible. I stood outside Charles's office, clutching the folder of documents to my chest like it was armor. When he came out to meet me, he had his briefcase in one hand and coffee in the other, that calm, steady expression on his face that told me he was ready for a fight. Once we file this, he said, it becomes real. Are you sure you want to do this, Evelyn? I looked him straight in the eyes. They already made it real when they sold my house. Inside, the courthouse smelled like floor wax and nerves. People in suits walked briskly past, papers in hand, whispers echoing down the hallways. When we reached the clerk's window, Charles handed over the paperwork. Petition for fraudulent sale of property, he said clearly. The clerk stamped it, the sound echoing like a hammer in my chest. Just like that, it was official. I was suing my own daughter. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a mix of strength and grief. There's no handbook for moments like that. When your love for your child and your sense of justice collide so hard, you don't know which side hurts more. That night, I sat in my living room with an old photo album open on my lap. Denise's face smiled up at me from a dozen childhood photos, birthday parties, school plays, her first prom. She'd always been ambitious, always wanted control. Maybe I should have seen this coming. Maybe there were signs I missed. But even if I had, what mother expects her own child to sell the ground beneath her feet? My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When I opened it, a courier handed me a thick envelope, legal notice from Fallon's attorneys. They were countering, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my property, and that my daughter had acted in my best interests. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was their strategy, paint me as senile, incapable. Charles came by that evening when I called him. He looked through the papers, shaking his head. It's a low blow, he said, but not uncommon. They're trying to undermine your credibility before the hearing. I laughed bitterly. I ran my household, my finances, my husband's business paperwork for 30 years, and now they're saying I can't manage my own house? He smiled faintly. We'll prove otherwise. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, signatures, and sleepless nights. Fallon's people were relentless. They sent letters, made calls, even offered to settle quietly if I agreed to drop the claim and move out. But I wasn't moving anywhere. One afternoon, while I was sitting on the porch sorting through more documents, a car pulled up. Out stepped a woman in her 30s, sharply dressed, carrying a leather folder. She introduced herself as Rachel Fallon, Mark's sister and business partner. I wanted to speak to you woman to woman, she said, her tone soft but firm. I gestured for her to sit. Then speak. She looked me over like she was studying a puzzle. Mark told me about your case. I checked the paperwork myself. He was wrong to push the sale forward without confirming the signatures. I'll be honest, Mrs. Williams, the company doesn't want this kind of publicity. If you agree to a private settlement, we'll transfer the title back and compensate you for the trouble. For a moment I didn't say anything. I could feel the weight of what she was offering. A clean end, a quiet solution. But something about it didn't sit right. I shook my head. It's not about money, dear. It's about respect. About what's right. You can't just buy that. Rachel sighed, almost as if she expected that answer. You're tougher than my brother said. I smiled faintly. That's because your brother's never met a woman who built her own foundation. She nodded, stood, and handed me her card. If you ever change your mind, call me. After she left, I sat there a long time staring at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost resembled peace. But peace doesn't last long when money's involved. The next morning, I woke to a commotion outside. There were trucks in my driveway movers again. I stormed outside, heart racing. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted. A man in a hard hat held up a clipboard. "We've been instructed to clear the property for renovation. Orders from Fallon Properties. You step 1 foot in that house and I'll have you arrested," I said sharply. I called Charles immediately. He told me to take pictures, get their company name and send him everything. "They're trying to intimidate you," he said. "But legally, they can't touch that house until the case is settled." I walked right up to the workers and said, "You tell your boss that this house belongs to Evelyn Williams. And she's still standing in it." They packed up and left by afternoon. I could feel the neighbors watching from behind curtains, probably whispering about the old lady fighting a property war. Let them whisper. I'd rather be the stubborn old woman who fought back than the quiet one who got pushed aside. That night I sat by the window, the framed deed beside me. I could almost hear my husband's voice again. That calm tone he used when life threw a storm our way. "You can't control what people do, Evie," he used to say. "You can only control how long you stand your ground." And I was standing my ground. A week later Charles called. "Good news," he said. "The judge approved a preliminary injunction. The sale is frozen until we resolve the case." For the first time in months I exhaled. So they can't touch it? Not legally. And Fallon's lawyers know it. They'll try to wear you down, but don't give in. "I won't," I said. That night I poured myself a glass of wine, something I hadn't done since Robert passed, and sat on the porch with the lights dimmed, the air cool and quiet. The oak tree swayed softly, the leaves whispering in the dark. I raised my glass to the house, to the memories inside it, and whispered, "We're not done yet." The fight wasn't over, but for the first time I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Because they might have sold my house without asking, but now they were about to learn that I was the wrong woman to underestimate. And the next time I stepped into that courtroom, I wasn't walking in as a victim. I was walking in as a woman who still owned her name. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and coffee when I stepped in that morning. My shoes clicked against the polished marble floor as I made my way down the hallway, clutching my purse close to my chest. Inside it was the deed, folded neatly, tucked between photographs of my children. It felt symbolic somehow, the past and the proof of who I was side by side. Charles walked beside me, his expression calm but sharp. "Remember," he said softly, "you don't have to prove you're a perfect mother. You just have to prove you're the rightful owner." "I know," I whispered, though my heart felt heavy, because this wasn't just about ownership. It was about betrayal. When we entered the courtroom, Denise was already there. She didn't look at me. She sat 2 rows ahead with her husband, Brian, both dressed sharply, whispering to their lawyer. I could still recognize that little nervous habit of hers, tapping her fingernail against the table when she was uncomfortable. She used to do that when she was a teenager, hiding bad grades or a broken curfew. Now she was hiding something far worse. Mark Fallon sat on the opposite side with his attorney, confident and impatient, as if this whole thing was a minor inconvenience. When his eyes met mine, he smiled, not kindly, but like a man who still thought he'd win. The judge, a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair, called the hearing to order. "This case," she said, glancing at her notes, "concerns a disputed property sale where the plaintiff, Mrs. Evelyn Williams, claims her home was sold fraudulently by relatives without her consent." My throat tightened as I stood, feeling the weight of every eye in that room. Charles began the opening argument, steady, precise, respectful. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mrs. Williams did not authorize the sale, did not sign any transfer documents, and that the deed remains in her legal possession." Then it was Fallon's lawyer's turn. He stood, slick and confident, voice dripping with rehearsed charm. "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mrs. Williams's feelings, this case arises from confusion, not fraud. Her daughter, acting in concern for her mother's declining judgment, facilitated the sale in order to provide safer living arrangements. There was no ill intent." "Declining judgment," I muttered under my breath. I could feel my pulse quicken. Charles placed a hand on my arm, a silent signal to stay calm. But the lawyer wasn't done. He turned to the judge and said, "We have reason to believe Mrs. Williams may not have full mental capacity to manage her affairs." That was it. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I rose from my chair, my voice steady but sharp. I am not crazy, I said, my tone echoing across the courtroom. I pay my bills, I cook my meals, and I remember every single detail of how my children betrayed me. So don't stand there and tell me I'm incapable. The judge raised her hand gently. Mrs. Williams, please sit. You'll have your chance to speak. I sat down, my hands trembling. But inside something burned brighter, anger, yes, but also strength. I wasn't going to let anyone twist my story. The hearing continued for hours. Charles presented the original deed, notarized years ago. He played a recording I'd made of Denise admitting she'd taken care of the sale. He even showed the bank transfers that led straight to her husband's account. Piece by piece, he built the truth back together. By the time he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Fallon's lawyer seemed uneasy. Then Denise was called to the stand. She walked slowly, eyes down, voice small. The judge asked, "Did your mother sign the sale documents?" Denise hesitated. We thought she would eventually agree. We just needed to move things quickly." "Answer the question," the judge said firmly. "No. She didn't sign them." It felt like the air left the room. For a moment, even I couldn't breathe. Charles stood. "And did you or your husband forge her signature?" Denise's lips trembled. "It wasn't like that. Brian said it was just paperwork, that she wouldn't understand the legal side. He told me it was fine." I closed my eyes. That voice, her voice, sounded just like the little girl I used to tuck in at night, scared after a thunderstorm. But the storm she brought this time wasn't weather. It was greed. The judge called for a recess. I stepped outside into the hallway, leaning against the wall, trying to steady myself. My reflection in the glass window looked older than I remembered. Not tired exactly, but changed. Hardened. Denise came out a few minutes later. She approached me slowly. "Mom," she whispered. I didn't answer. "Mom, I never meant for it to go this far. We just thought. You thought you could take what was mine and decide what was best for me?" I cut her off, my voice low but fierce. "You sold the only thing your father and I built together. You lied to me, Denise." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the day you forged my name," I said quietly. She started to cry, covering her face with her hands. For a moment my heart almost softened. Almost. But I turned away. Love doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. Back in the courtroom, Fallon tried to salvage his case, arguing that his company had acted in good faith, that he didn't know about the forgery. But the judge wasn't swayed. She glanced at the deed, the signatures, the timestamps. By the end of that day, she announced that she'd make her ruling within 2 weeks. I walked out of that courthouse feeling hollow, not triumphant, not broken, just in between. The wind was strong that afternoon, tugging at my coat as if trying to push me forward. Charles walked beside me in silence until he said, "You did good today." "I don't feel good," I admitted. "You will," he said. "When truth wins, it takes time to feel like victory." I nodded, staring at the gray sky. "You think the judge will rule in our favor?" He smiled faintly. "The law's on your side, Evelyn. And so is justice." As I drove home, the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows over the road. My house came into view, quiet, still, defiant. I parked the car and just sat there, looking at it through the windshield. This wasn't just a building. It was a promise, one I'd made to myself and to the man I'd loved. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. They might have tried to erase my name from the papers, but not from the land, not from the memories, and not from the fight that still burned inside me. And as the first stars appeared that night, I whispered to the house, "We're almost home." The next 2 weeks crawled by like a slow, aching heartbeat. Every day I woke up at dawn, made a pot of coffee, and sat by the window waiting for the phone call, the letter, the verdict that would decide whether my home was still mine or just another line on someone else's balance sheet. Some nights I barely slept. I'd walk through the quiet rooms, my footsteps echoing off bare floors where once there'd been laughter, music, and the hum of family. I'd trace my fingers along the walls, remembering the way Robert had painted them himself, stubbornly refusing to hire anyone, saying, "If these walls are ours, they should be touched by our hands." I still remembered that day clearly. The smell of fresh paint, the radio playing soft jazz, and the way he grinned when I smudged white paint across his cheek. Those memories were my armor now. Every time I thought about giving up, I saw his face in my mind, patient, steady, the kind of man who never ran from a fight if it meant protecting what mattered. One morning, a knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I opened it to find the mail carrier holding a large envelope marked with the courthouse seal. My heart pounded as I signed for it, the pen trembling in my hand. It was the ruling. I stood there for a long time before opening it, staring at my name printed in bold letters. Evelyn Williams versus Fallon Properties and Associated Parties. Finally, I tore it open. The first line said everything. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Evelyn Williams. My knees nearly gave out. I had to lean against the wall as the rest of the words blurred in front of my eyes. The judge had declared the sale null and void. My ownership remained intact. Fallon's company was ordered to pay damages for distress and fraudulent activity. Denise and Brian were to return all remaining funds from the sale. I pressed the letter to my chest and let out a long, shuddering breath. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Called Charles right away. When he answered, his tone was calm, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "You did it, Evelyn." "No," I said softly, tears rolling down my cheeks. "We did it. Thank you." "Justice did it," he replied. "And a stubborn woman who refused to be erased." After I hung up, I stood in the doorway and looked at my house. The afternoon sun bathed the porch in golden light. It looked alive again, like it knew it had been saved. But victory is never simple. Later that evening, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I glanced out and saw Denise step out, clutching a small box in her hands. For a moment I thought about locking the door. But something in me told me not to. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in spirit. Her eyes were red, her hair slightly messy, and her voice was quiet when she spoke. "Mom, can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded. For a few minutes. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the living room like she was seeing it for the first time in years. "It feels smaller," she murmured. "No," I said. "You just grew bigger than your conscience." She winced and I almost felt bad, almost. She placed the box on the table. "I brought your things from the storage unit. Some of Dad's old records, your photo albums. I should have never moved them without asking." I stayed silent, watching her. "Mom," she whispered, "I messed up. I thought I was helping. Brian said we could use the money to get you a place closer to me, that you'd be safer, less lonely. But I never thought it would get this far." I sighed deeply. "Denise, you didn't think at all. You just decided. You didn't talk to me, you didn't listen, you just assumed you knew what was best for me. That's not love. That's control." Her eyes filled again. "I know. And I'm sorry. I've been sick thinking about it. The house, the court, the things I said. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just needed you to know I'm sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath all the pain and pride, she was still my daughter. The same little girl who used to run down this hallway in her pajamas, clutching her teddy bear. The same girl who cried when her father passed. But forgiveness doesn't come just because someone cries. It comes when you see they're ready to change. "I believe you're sorry," I said quietly. "But sorry doesn't fix everything. You took something from me that wasn't just mine. It was your father's legacy. You'll have to live with that." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I know." We stood in silence for a long time. Then she said softly, "Can I come by again sometime?" "Maybe," I said. "When you learn how to ask first." She gave a small broken smile, then turned and walked out. As her car disappeared down the road, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. That night, I took the box she'd brought and opened it on the coffee table. Inside were old photos, yellowed letters, and a small wooden frame. I lifted it out and found a picture of Robert holding Denise as a baby, both of them smiling so wide it almost hurt to look at. I set the picture on the mantel, next to the framed deed. 2 pieces of my life, love and loss side by side. As I sat there, I realized something. This wasn't just about keeping a house. It was about keeping myself. My independence. My worth. The next morning, I walked out to the backyard, stood beneath the old oak tree Robert had planted, and pressed my palm to the trunk. The initials he'd carved decades ago, our plus were still there, faded but strong. Just like us. The wind rustled through the branches, carrying the soft scent of earth and memory. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe again. My house was still mine. My name was still mine. And even though the people I loved had betrayed me, I hadn't lost who I was. Sometimes winning isn't about revenge. It's about reminding the world and yourself that you were never theirs to decide for. I turned toward the house, sunlight catching on the windows, and whispered, "We made it, Robert. We really did." Summer arrived gently that year, as if the world itself wanted to give me a chance to breathe again. The air was warm but kind, the flowers in my garden bloomed brighter than they had in years, and the oak tree out back, Robert's tree, stretched its green arms toward the sky, proud and steady. I'd survived the storm, but even after victory, life doesn't just go back to normal. The first few weeks after the ruling, I felt lost in the quiet. 4 months, my days had been filled with lawyers' hearings and late-night planning. Now the silence echoed louder than any argument ever had. The house that once felt like my prison during the battle now felt like a cathedral. Sacred, but too big for one person's thoughts. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for Denise's voice, the slam of her car door, the sound of her laughter down the hallway. Other times I'd think about calling her. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered that courtroom, her avoiding my eyes, my name being twisted into something weak. Then I'd set the phone back down. Healing takes time, and forgiveness, well, forgiveness takes longer. One morning while watering the front porch plants, I noticed a white car slowing down by my driveway. I squinted in the sunlight. It wasn't Denise's car. It was Rachel Fallon. She stepped out wearing a neat blouse and slacks, holding a manila envelope in her hands. "Mrs. Williams," she called, walking toward me. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. "Miss Fallon. Didn't think I'd see you again." She smiled politely. "I wanted to apologize in person. My brother, he lost a lot after the ruling. He won't admit it, but he respects you now. Not everyone would have stood their ground the way you did." I studied her for a moment, trying to read her tone. There was no smugness there, just honesty. "It wasn't about winning," I said quietly. "It was about being heard." She nodded and handed me the envelope. "These are the final transfer documents from Fallon Properties. The deed, cleared and confirmed under your name. No more disputes, no more loopholes." I took it slowly, the paper warm from her hands. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. As she turned to leave, she paused. "You know," she said softly, "you could have easily lost. But you didn't. Most people your age would have walked away." I smiled faintly. "That's because most people my age already learned that walking away is how you lose everything." She nodded, got in her car, and drove off. I stood there for a long time, the envelope clutched to my chest. The world around me felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't the heavy kind of quiet. It was peaceful, like the air after a long storm. That afternoon, I decided to invite a few old friends from church over. I hadn't seen them properly in months. They brought pie, lemonade, and those warm, knowing smiles women carry when they've seen life's hardest seasons. We sat on the porch talking about gardens, neighbors, and everything except court cases and betrayal. "Evie," one of them said, "you've been through hell and came out shining. How do you do it?" I laughed softly. By remembering I still had my name on the deed, and on my soul. They all nodded, the way only women who've endured too much can. That evening after they left, I sat alone again, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in gold and violet, like a gift. I thought about how many people out there might have gone through something similar, being pushed out of their own homes, their voices dismissed because of their age, their independence taken in the name of care. And I realized something. My story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who'd ever been told she couldn't handle her own life. Every mother who'd been silenced by her own family. Every person who'd been written off too soon. The next morning I did something unexpected. I went to the local community center. They were hosting a meeting for senior homeowners about property rights and scams. I stood in the back, listening to the speaker for a while. Then when the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. "I don't have a question," I said, my voice steady, "but I have a story." And I told it. From the beginning, the letter, the betrayal, the courtroom, the victory. The whole room went silent. Some people gasped. Others wiped their eyes. By the end, the organizer asked if I'd be willing to speak again at future meetings. For the first time in a long time, I said yes. Weeks passed and my name started to spread around town, not as the woman who sued her daughter, but as the woman who stood her ground. I was invited to speak at churches, libraries, and senior groups. I never sought attention, but I couldn't ignore how many faces in the crowd nodded along, recognizing themselves in my story. One afternoon, after a talk at the local library, a woman about Denise's age came up to me, tears in her eyes. "My brother did the same thing to our father," she said. "He never fought back. We lost everything. I wish he'd had your courage." I took her hand gently and said, "Courage isn't loud, dear. It's just the quiet decision not to give up." That night, I came home to my quiet house. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt alive again. Not because it was just mine, but because I'd filled it with something new purpose. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and looked at the framed deed on the wall. Next to it was Robert's photo, smiling, proud, timeless. I whispered, "We did it, love. We didn't just keep the house. We made it matter." The crickets sang outside, the oak tree rustled softly, and for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. Because the truth is, they might have sold my house without asking, but what they couldn't sell, what they could never own, was me. And that, I realized, was worth more than any house in the world. Fall felt like a quiet blessing after the chaos of summer. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves, and sunlight streamed through the trees in golden streaks. The house, my house, felt like it was breathing again, slowly waking from a long, tense slumber. I spent hours walking through the rooms, touching the walls, checking each window latch, making sure everything was exactly how it should be. Ownership wasn't just legal anymore. It felt spiritual. I had reclaimed not only the paper deed but the heartbeat of the home. Denise had stopped coming around. At first, I worried she might disappear entirely from my life, unwilling to face me after everything. But over time, I realized her absence wasn't anger. It was reflection. She needed to see the consequences of her actions before she could even think about reconciliation. And I couldn't rush that. One day, while tending to my garden, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from the street, a small silhouette framed by the orange afternoon light. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, holding a basket of apples. She smiled warmly. "Evelyn," she said, "I heard about the ruling. Congratulations. You did what most women wouldn't dare." I chuckled. Most women don't have a choice like this forced upon them. I didn't dare. I just had to survive. She nodded knowingly. "Well, you survived and thrived. That house is yours, heart and soul." Her words reminded me of how far I had come. Weeks ago, I had been pacing in my living room, feeling trapped and betrayed. Now I was walking through my garden, breathing freely, sunlight warming my shoulders. There was still tension beneath the surface, but I had won back my life. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a blanket draped around my shoulders. The flames danced in the hearth, casting shadows across the room. I thought about Denise, about Fallon, about the months of sleepless nights and endless tension. I had expected relief to feel light, but it was heavy. A weight made of justice, clarity, and awareness. I realized that holding on to that weight, understanding it, was part of what made me strong. A few days later, a letter arrived. This time not from a lawyer, but from Denise herself. Her handwriting was shaky. She wrote that she understood the gravity of what she had done, and that she wanted to repair our relationship slowly, starting with honesty and trust. I held the letter in my hands and stared at it long after the tears had stopped. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't even an apology I could fully accept yet. But it was a start, the first acknowledgement of truth from someone who had taken what wasn't theirs. I called Charles to tell him, and he smiled. "Looks like the storm's finally clearing." "Yes," I said softly. "But I'm not letting anyone forget how hard I fought." Fallon didn't come around anymore. The town talked quietly about the case, and I noticed a shift in how people looked at me. Respect, admiration, and a sense of awe for the woman who had refused to be silenced. That recognition wasn't what drove me, but it was comforting. One morning I decided to go through the attic. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the small windows. I found old boxes with photographs, letters from friends long gone, and Robert's journals. As I flipped through the pages, I smiled at his meticulous handwriting, at the careful sketches of the house he loved, and at his hopes for our family. I realized then that the house was more than a structure. It was memory. It was history. And now it was a testament to survival, courage, and endurance. Every creak of the floor, every mark on the wall, every faded photograph. They all told a story that no money, no deception, no betrayal could erase. That night, I sat in my favorite armchair, the deed on the table before me, framed in sunlight from the window. I traced the letters of my name with my finger, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Evelyn Williams, a woman who had been tested, betrayed, and challenged, but who remained standing. I whispered into the quiet of the house, "We made it. We're still here." And for the first time in months I truly believed it. The storm had passed. The house was mine. And so was I. Winter arrived quietly, blanketing the town in frost and soft light. Snow covered the streets in white, the world seeming calm and distant. I watched it fall from my front window sipping tea, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in months. The house, finally free from threats and false documents, felt alive again. It had survived storms of betrayal and greed, and so had I. The past year replayed in my mind like a movie I couldn't pause. I remembered the day I discovered the sale, the heartbreak of walking through empty rooms, the shock of realizing my daughter had betrayed me. Every step of the legal battle, every sleepless night, every meeting with Fallon's attorneys and the court, it all felt like walking through a storm with no umbrella. But I had weathered it. I had stood firm, and in the end, the law and truth had vindicated me. Yet the emotional toll had been heavy. Denise had been absent, and I often felt the weight of her betrayal as if it were a physical presence. The house had felt cold during her absence, the walls echoing with memories and silence. I had sometimes wondered if I had pushed too hard, if in my insistence on justice I had risked severing the bond with my daughter forever. But the thought of letting the fraud stand, of losing everything Robert and I had built, was unbearable. One snowy morning, a soft knock on the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Denise stood there wrapped in a heavy coat, hands stuffed in her pockets, her face pale from the cold, eyes wide. This time there was no excuse, no deflection, only hesitation and fear. "Mom," she said quietly. I studied her, searching for the girl I once knew behind the adult she had become, the one who had sold my house, lied, and betrayed me. My heart ached, but I kept my voice even. "Denise," I said. "It's cold. Come in." She stepped inside slowly, looking around as if seeing the house for the first time since the chaos began. The air smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon from the candles I kept burning, a small comfort in the stillness. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice catching. I gestured toward the living room. "Sit down. We'll talk." She hesitated before settling on the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Finally she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "About what I did. About everything. I know I hurt you, Mom. I betrayed your trust. And I can't undo that, no matter what I say or do." I nodded slowly. "I know. And it hurt more than you can imagine." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't think I was capable of hurting you like that. I thought I was helping. But I see now I was wrong. So wrong." I felt a swell of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to forgive her instantly, to feel the relief of reclaiming what had been lost. But another part, the part that had spent months fighting for my rights and my dignity, knew that forgiveness must be earned, not demanded. "Denise," I said carefully, "what you did took more than my trust. It took my home, the memories of your father, and the life Robert and I built together. That can't be replaced by words alone." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I want to try. I want to rebuild even if it takes years. I want to be a daughter you can be proud of again." I studied her, searching for sincerity in her gaze. There it was, that small tentative flicker of honesty, of regret, of the desire to make amends. Slowly I extended my hand. "Then start by being truthful," I said. "Be patient. And understand that trust isn't given back overnight. It's earned piece by piece." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I will, Mom. I promise." We sat together for a long time in silence, the snow falling outside like a blanket over the world, the house warm and alive with quiet renewal. I realized then that the battle had never truly been just about property. It had been about respect, honesty, and the integrity of family bonds. The house had been the stage, but the real victory was reclaiming my own strength, my voice, and my dignity. In the weeks that followed, Denise made small gestures of reconciliation. She helped around the house, returned documents, and even began attending the community meetings I had started speaking at. Slowly, the distance between us narrowed, replaced with cautious rebuilding of trust. It wasn't perfect. Some days were awkward, others tense, but every step forward was progress. The town began to notice the change, too. Neighbors who had whispered during the legal battles now offered nods of respect and kind words. Some admitted they had doubted I could stand firm. Others shared their own stories of betrayal and loss, seeking guidance. My voice, once quiet and unheard, became a source of reassurance for others. I began to understand that my fight had not only been for myself but for every person who had ever felt powerless against greed and deception. One evening, as the first snow of December coated the trees and rooftops, I stood by the window looking out at the street. The lights of my house glowed softly, welcoming and steadfast. The deed, framed above the mantel, caught the lamplight, a silent reminder of the victory I had fought so fiercely to secure. I thought about Robert and the life we had built together. The laughter, the hardships, the unwavering belief that our home was sacred. I thought about Denise, about the mistakes she had made and the steps she was taking to make amends. And I thought about myself, the woman who had faced betrayal, deceit, and relentless pressure, yet had refused to be broken. For the first time in a long time, I felt a profound sense of closure. The house was mine, the memories intact, and the legacy of my husband preserved. More importantly, I had reclaimed my own voice, my independence, and my self-respect. I had faced the storm and emerged not only victorious but stronger than ever. As the snow continued to fall, I whispered into the quiet of the house, "We did it, Robert. We held on. We protected everything we built together. And I'm still standing." That night, I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had fought battles that tested every ounce of my courage, but in the end I had emerged not just as a homeowner, not just as a mother, but as a woman who refused to be silenced or overpowered. I knew there would still be challenges. Life always brings them. But I also knew that no matter what came, I would face it with the same strength, dignity, and determination that had carried me through the storm. Because in the end, the house was not just a building. It was a testament to perseverance. It was proof that truth and justice, no matter how delayed, can prevail. And it was a reminder that a mother's strength, tempered by love but unyielding in principle, can endure any betrayal and reclaim what is rightfully hers. The snow blanketed the world outside, quiet and beautiful, and inside, my home glowed with warmth, memories, and the promise of new beginnings. I knew the future would not be without challenges, but I also knew I had the courage and resilience to face them. For the first time in years, I felt whole. And as I drifted to sleep, I whispered one last time, a soft vow to myself and to Robert's memory, "No one will ever take what we built. Not now, not ever. This is ours. And I am still here." The house, the memories, and I all were unbroken. A testament to endurance, love, and the power of standing firm in the face of betrayal.